In the early hours of August 15, 1975, before sunrise, several officers from the Bangladeshi army approached the private residence of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the leader of Bangladesh's independence and the country's president. In a short time, they eliminated the few guards and entered the building. They killed Sheikh Mujib along with almost all members of his family, including his 10-year-old son and most of household staff. Only Sheikh Mujib's daughters, who were traveling in Europe, survived this assassination. This was one of the most shocking events in the history of Bangladesh, a history that was destined to pass through very rough terrain. The young daughter of Sheikh Mujib, Sheikh Hasina, would one day take power in this country in place of her father and would eventually flee the country amid revolutionary protests, living in a helicopter. To hear about the complex and instructive history of this country and the reasons and background that led to the recent revolution in this country, stay with me on Channel Zero. Hello, welcome to the first episode of the Channel Zero podcast. In this program, I want to narrate stories of significant experiences and influential thoughts in the history of humanity. My focus will be primarily on history, politics, art, and if possible, on philosophy, psychoanalysis, and literature as well. I will try to choose topics that can impact our lives today and influence our individual and social decisions. Every revolution in every country has its own reasons and characteristics. The recent revolution in Bangladesh, which took place in summer of 2024, also has its own unique political, economic, and cultural reasons, which we will discuss in this program. We will also examine the unique features of the Bangladeshi revolution and the consequences of this transformation up to the present day. To find the roots of Bangladeshi revolution, we must first turn to the history of this country, back to the 1960s and 70s, when the people of this country were striving to gain independence from Pakistan. Independence that was achieved at the cost of several years of struggle and war and the lives of more than 300,000 Bangladeshis. Before 1947, the people of Bengal were under British control as part of the Indian subcontinent. With the success of nationalist and anti-colonial struggles in India, the British government divided this subcontinent into two parts, predominantly Muslim parts as Pakistan and the main part of India. The Bengalis, who lived in the eastern part of this subcontinent, became part of Pakistan due to their predominantly Islamic religion, but were entirely separate from its western part, forming the state of East Bengal, which in 1954, during Pakistan's complete independence from Britain, was renamed as East Pakistan. Despite having a larger population, the Bengalis were under the cultural and economic oppression of West Pakistan until 1971 and had little influence on the central political decisions. In 1948, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Pakistan's first governor-general, declared Urdu as the country's only official language, part of the central government's policy to culturally homogenize the country. This sparked the anger of many Bangladeshis who wanted to preserve their native language. As a result, in 1952, Bangladeshi students and intellectuals started the Bengali language movement, which in a way marked the beginning of the people's struggle against the central government of Pakistan. The economic differences between the people of Bangladesh and the rulers of Pakistan gradually became evident. Despite East Pakistan's major contribution to the country's economy through the production and export of agricultural products like jute, government investment and public welfare in this region were far less than West Pakistan. Additionally, in the political sphere, the central rulers of Pakistan imposed many political restrictions on the people of Bangladesh and their nationalist leaders. One of these leaders was Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, a political activist who, since the time of British rule in this region, sought to secure the rights of the Bengalis from the central government.
If you want to save that and give equal right as a Pakistani, then you have to give Bengal their right to live. And they must be master of their own resources because they have been exploited for long 23 years. It cannot be tolerated anymore.
The growing dissatisfaction among the Bengalis led to increased protests, the formation of civil resistance, and the gradual distancing of the people from the central government. The people of Bengal slowly began to distance themselves from their fellow Muslim Pakistanis and drew closer to the Indians, with whom they shared more in terms of race, language, and geography. Throughout the years following the independence of India and Pakistan, these two countries had many disputes over various border regions, which led to military conflicts several times. During this period, the Indian government viewed the presence of Pakistani forces on its eastern borders as a significant threat and sought to support the idea of Bangladesh's independence and separation from Pakistan's central government by getting closer to the opposition leaders among the Bengalis. All these conflicts and political alignments had put pressure on the Pakistani government, but instead of resolving the issues, they chose military suppression and violence. In March 1971, one of the most brutal operations in history, dubbed Operation Searchlight, was launched by General Yahya Khan, the president of Pakistan, and General Tika Khan, the military commander of East Pakistan, against the people of Bengal. This operation, which lasted 8 months, involved the killing of over 300,000 people, the displacement of over 30 million people, the suppression, arrest, and torture of millions of Bangladeshi students and intellectuals, and the rape of more than 200,000 women. This was probably the first time in human history that rape was systematically used on such a large scale for political and military purposes. The Hindu population in East Pakistan was particularly targeted by these atrocities, leading to a massive migration of both Hindu and Muslim Bengalis to India. With the start of the violent Pakistani operations, on March 26, 1971, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman officially declared the independence of Bangladesh via radio and called on all the people of Bangladesh to confront the Pakistani government and forces. This led to Sheikh Mujib's arrest and imprisonment by Pakistani forces. His call further strengthened the Bengali resistance front known as Mukti Bahini, and on April 17th, the interim government of Bangladesh was formed, with the imprisoned Sheikh Mujib selected as the first president of Bangladesh. The struggle for independence by the Bengalis continued for several months, involving clashes with Pakistani forces and Islamist parties and religious leaders like Ghulam Azam, who opposed the nationalistic and freedom-seeking demands of the Bangladeshis. In parallel with these developments, the Indian government, led by Indira Gandhi, faced with a massive wave of refugees and migrants from Bangladesh, decided to directly support Bangladesh's independence. Alongside international correspondences, India provided military and logistical support to the Bengali resistance front. This escalated the military conflicts, involving both naval and air forces from both countries, and ultimately, with the encirclement of 93,000 Pakistani troops by Indian forces, one of the largest military surrenders in history, the Pakistani government was forced to sign a peace treaty with the Indian army. This led to the withdrawal of all Pakistani military and government forces from the region, paving the way for Bangladesh to be recognized as an independent country. With the resignation of Yahya Khan and the rise to power of Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and under international pressure, the Pakistani government decided to release Sheikh Mujib from prison, implicitly acknowledging the independence of Bangladesh. Upon his return, Sheikh Mujib officially began leading Bangladesh as its first president. embarking on the path of rebuilding and developing a war-torn, poverty-stricken country facing numerous crises. After independence, Sheikh Mujib changed the name of his party from the Awami Muslim League to the Awami League and, by aligning with the Eastern Bloc and opposing the United States, adopted somewhat leftist and socialist policies. However, despite reforms in the country's economic structure, these policies failed to significantly improve the general state of the people, and instead of creating a democratic space, Mujib adopted a dictatorial approach, gradually banning all opposition parties. This triggered widespread opposition to him in Bangladesh, and eventually, with the Great Famine of 1974, opposition to Sheikh Mujib reached its peak. Finally, on August 15, 1975, Sheikh Mujib was brutally assassinated in a coup by several army officers at his residence, along with most of his family. This major assassination marked the beginning of several decades of political tension, competition, and various political assassinations in Bangladesh. A competitive atmosphere emerged among different parties, and with the occasional intervention of the military, the established order was constantly subject to changes. Bangladesh was governed by the military for about 25 years. One of the prominent military leaders was General Ziaur Rahman, who managed to fend off multiple military coups against himself between 1977 and 1981, and with reforms and socialist perspectives and a relative inclination towards a free market, he brought about improvements in the general state of Bangladesh. Ziaur Rahman founded the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, BNP, which had a right-wing, conservative, and Islamist approach. Unlike Mujib's secular approach, Ziaur Rahman's religious inclination and focus on the Islamic identity of the Bangladeshis increased his popularity among the general public. However, Ziaur Rahman was also assassinated on May 30, 1981, at his summer residence by several army officers. After him, various periods of unrest, coups, and military governments continued in Bangladesh. During this time, General Hussein Muhammad Ershad held the most power for nearly 10 years, adopting a dictatorial approach to governance, until he was finally arrested and imprisoned in 1991 following years of protests and demonstrations in the country by order of Chief Justice Shahban Ahmed. This order paved the way for the first free and widespread elections in Bangladesh, with the participation and support of most parties with different perspectives. Sheikh Hasina, the daughter of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who had been away from her family during the massacre and lived in India for many years, now led the Awami League, while Khalida Zia, the wife of Ziaur Rahman, the other surviving leader of Bangladesh, led the BNP. The BNP ultimately won a narrow majority in parliament and, by reinstating the parliamentary system, Khalida Zia became Bangladesh's first female prime minister. Sheikh Hasina also became the leader of the strongest opposition party in Bangladesh. This election marked the beginning of significant political and social transformations in Bangladesh on the path to development, a path that was to be shaped by these two women, Khalida Zia and Sheikh Hasina, during their respective periods of leadership in the country. The new government of Khalida Zia succeeded in implementing major reforms in Bangladesh during its 6 years in power. The primary focus of these reforms was on the country's education system and reducing illiteracy, especially among women. In addition, Zia's government made significant reforms in commercial trade, exports, and improving the political and administrative structure of the country. After the end of her first term, it was Sheikh Hasina in the Awami League who won a majority in the 1996 elections. Unlike her father, Sheikh Hasina made significant changes towards the use of the private sector and attracting foreign investment. By supporting production, especially in the agricultural sector, she spurred economic growth and significantly increased Bangladesh's GDP. Sheikh Hasina played a crucial role in reducing poverty in this country by supporting the lower-income class. She also succeeded in stabilizing Bangladesh's political position on the international stage through various international negotiations, joining multiple global treaties, and actively engaging with neighboring countries. Despite all these achievements, in 2001, opposition parties managed to form a coalition, securing a majority in parliament, and Khalida Zia once again took power as prime minister. With the start of the new government, Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League led the opposition, accusing Khalida Zia's BNP of collaborating with Islamist parties to create a corrupt political structure and exploit economic privileges. Despite this, Khalida Zia's government continued its path of economic development, strengthening military and economic cooperation with the United States and simultaneously forming a joint defense pact with China. This could be one of the reasons why relations between Bangladesh and its major neighbor, India, began to cool towards the end of Zia's government. In addition to this, various political assassinations, internal conflicts among individuals and parties, and numerous street protests made it increasingly difficult for Zia's government. Towards the end of her term in 2006, protests against both Zia's government and other senior officials and the corrupt political structure reached their peak. Eventually, after 2 years of strikes, protests, and various clashes, with the appointment of Fakhruddin Ahmed as the chief overseer and head of the interim government, and with the support of the army, many individuals, including Khalida Zia and her 2 sons, as well as Sheikh Hasina, were arrested on charges of corruption. Widespread student protests against corrupt political forces, discrimination, and the lack of progressive democracy took shape. But once again, it was Sheikh Hasina who, with the victory of the Awami League in the 2008 elections, returned to power. With the rise of Hasina's government, the idea of secularism regained strength in society, and the Supreme Court of Bangladesh, by re-recognizing secularism as a fundamental principle in the law, banned most Islamist political parties from operating. The BNP, as an ally of the Islamist parties, both in protest to this issue and due to political pressures against it, boycotted the 2014 elections, paving the way for Sheikh Hasina to return to power. In addition to continuing the country's economic growth and development path, Sheikh Hasina's government also took steps to improve Bangladesh's security and military status. However, it faced domestic and international criticism for limiting political freedoms and even freedom of expression. With the start of the Rohingya Muslim massacre in Myanmar in 2017, Hasina's government faced a significant challenge in managing the hundreds of thousands of refugees entering Bangladesh's border areas. Nevertheless, the Hasina government was relatively successful in managing this massive flow of refugees and later in negotiating with Myanmar to repatriate most of the displaced people. The BNP, with various assassinations, arrests, and suppressions, was gradually being removed from Bangladesh's political sphere, and this reached its peak with the arrest and imprisonment of Khalida Zia on charges of financial corruption, to the extent that the BNP failed to achieve significant success in the 2018 elections. However, many accused Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League of election fraud and creating obstacles for opponents in both the 2018 and 2024 elections. During her over 14 years in power since 2008, Sheikh Hasina managed to continue the path of economic reforms, focusing on production, particularly in the agricultural sector, industrializing production, utilizing the country's vast workforce, and concentrating on exports to Western countries, leading to significant economic growth and poverty reduction in Bangladesh. In the last decade, Bangladesh has become the world's second-largest exporter of textiles and garments, has the second-largest economy in South Asia, and is recognized as one of the world's fastest-growing economies. In general terms, Bangladesh has managed to surpass Pakistan in most economic indicators. However, all this economic progress has not yet managed to completely eliminate problems such as poverty, unemployment, and lack of public welfare in Bangladesh. Given its population of 170 million, the country's economic growth has not yet reached a satisfactory level. Many attribute the main reasons for this to widespread administrative corruption, the destructive competitive atmosphere between political parties, the constant clashes between these parties and their supporters, as well as the lack of freedom of expression and insufficient attention to cultural and political development in the country. All these issues were part of what drove the people of Bangladesh back to the streets in protest from late 2022. Sheikh Hasina, however, ignored these protests and, disregarding the boycott by the Nationalist Party, held another election in January 2024. Despite a very low turnout of 41%, she extended her term as prime minister. A few months after this election, in June 2024, it was a decision by the Supreme Court of Bangladesh that once again sparked the people's anger in the country. The decision involved a 30% quota for government jobs for the children of the fighters of Bangladesh's independence war. This decision particularly enraged the youth and students, leading to massive protests against the government in the streets and universities. Instead of backing down, Sheikh Hasina ordered the police to deal harshly with the protesters and, in a speech, labeled the protesters as traitors to the nation. The use of the term razakars, which referred to internal traitors during Bangladesh's independence, further fueled the anger of the young protesters, who then decided to completely overthrow Hasina's government. Islamist groups and opposition parties like the Nationalists also supported these protests, and eventually, after more than 700 students and protesters were killed, the Bangladeshi military leadership sided with the protesters. Finally, on August 3, 2024, Sheikh Hasina announced her resignation and fled to India by helicopter. This was a significant victory for the Bangladeshi protesters, especially the students. But alongside the celebrations and street parties held for this victory, there were also signs of uncertainty regarding the country's future. Although the Awami League has been removed from power, it still has many supporters across Bangladesh, and due to the prominent role this party played during and after the country's independence, it is likely that the Awami League will never be completely eliminated from the country's political equations. With the removal of the incumbent government and the arrest and dismissal of many police commanders, the state of chaos has emerged in the country's political and law enforcement structures. In the weeks following the victory of the Bangladeshi Revolution, there have been violent attacks against the Hindu minority in the country, and the risk of the emergence of extremist groups, such as radical Islamists or extreme nationalists, and the escalation of ethnic and ideological tensions in the country has increased. Despite these threats, the Bangladeshi military, under the command of Waqar Azman, has tried to control the tense situation in the country and has called on various groups and parties to form a temporary government and work together to get through the crisis. Now, these opposition parties have entrusted the leadership of the interim government to Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Prize winner. Yunus, an economist, won the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to provide microloans, support small businesses, and reduce poverty in Bangladesh. Yunus' ideas and work have been modeled not only in Bangladesh but also in other countries. However, due to his opposition to Sheikh Hasina, he has been convicted, banned from activities, and imprisoned several times. Yunus is likely one of the most acceptable figures who could reduce tensions among various groups and help rebuild the political and even economic structure of Bangladesh due to his reputation and work. It is highly likely that the future political leadership of Bangladesh will be taken over by one of two groups. One being nationalist and conservative forces that strive to maintain balance among various domestic and foreign forces and aim to stand against unrest and increasing tensions in the country. Muhammad Yunus can be seen as a suitable representative for this group. The other group, however, consists of extremist and fundamentalist Islamic forces led by the Jamaati Islami Party, who seek to gain a share of power after years of relative secularism in the country and fully establish Islamic laws in the political arena. It seems that this group is supported by Islamist movements in the Middle East, and even countries like Pakistan and China may be using them to counter the growing power of India in the region. Western countries, however, have taken contradictory and sometimes unclear positions regarding political changes in this country, and it appears that they will choose and support political forces based on the current situation in the country and their long-term interests. Bangladesh can be called the land of revolutions, assassinations, and coups. Since its independence, the country has never experienced a peaceful political atmosphere and has constantly lost significant opportunities for growth and development amid the conflicts and disputes of various parties and groups. Due to its production potential, young workforce, and high economic growth prospects, Bangladesh may be seen as a threat to various countries, particularly Pakistan, China, and even India, which has increased the likelihood of foreign intervention in this country. Now, the people, especially the youth and intellectuals of this country, have turned their eyes to Muhammad Yunus and other political leaders, hoping that they can pave the way for free elections, cooperation among parties, and the formation of a competent government supported by the majority of the people. Perhaps this could mark the end of internal conflicts and the beginning of a new chapter for the growth and prosperity of this country. We have come to the end of the first episode of the Channel Zero podcast. If you want to join me in this program, please subscribe to this channel. And thank you. See you later.